Hi everyone, I'm going to show you how to integrate my VR Body IK system with the VR expansion plugin and their template, which I'll have linked in the description. That's what I'm in right now, and I've just added my project files to it. I'm just going to show you how to integrate the body system with replication and merge the hand animations with their grasping system to create a pretty solid experience. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just go into the VR expansion plugin and find the blueprint underscore VR character. There we go. This is their base character template. And I'm just going to create a child blueprint class for our body system. I'm just going to leave it named that. It's a bit easier to find that way. And when you come in here, this is based off of the character blueprint, I believe. So there's already a character mesh in here. And I'm going to just set this to our simple mannequin skeleton from the full body VR template directory for now. And then I'm going to give it the VR body animation blueprint. I'm going to set the tick group to post physics, because if it's set to pre-physics, you'll have some like lag between your hands and the body. And then I believe that's all we need to do there. I'm just going to move it down by like 96 and rotate it negative 90 degrees on the Z axis, so that it looks nice in here. That's not going to matter because it's going to be automatically setting the position anyways, but this is just so it looks nicer in the viewport. And then I'm going to go into our event graph, and on event tick, we want to adjust the location of our skeletal mesh, because it uses that for the estimation. So you always want your mesh's location being, this little spot right here between the feet. You always want that to be on the ground your character is standing on and directly under the head. So this parent relative attachment that's over it automatically keeps it underneath your head. It's just not quite on the ground. So I'm going to take our mesh, drag out, and I'm going to set the world location. I'm going to split the struct pin, and I'm just going to set the X and Y to the values that it already is. So I'm just getting the world location and setting the X and Y to the same value, so those won't be changing. And then if you come up here, this VR proxy component stays on the ground underneath our character. It has the correct Z height, so I'm just going to get the world location from that and use that to set the height of our skeletal mesh. Now, I'm going to set the references for our character. So first off, I am going to show you how to use it with their grasping hands system. So it's a little bit different than the regular integration where, you just reference the left controller for the location and stuff like that. But I'll go ahead and find my full body component. If I go into the full body VR template and blueprints, you can see right here, there's a VR body component, and I'm going to drag that in as a child of my mesh. I don't actually know where it just went. I think if I select the mesh, then it'll drag it in as a child. There we go. And then you always want to make sure that the VR body component is set to where you want the player's point of view to be. So usually just between the eyes and in front of the face is a great spot. About right there looks good. And before we set our references, so let me pull this out and get the set references function. Before we do this, and this is also like so that everything has time to replicate properly, we are going to get our grasping hands, both left and right, and we're going to convert this to a validated get so that we can make sure that both the left and right grasping hands have spawned before we try and set them as references. So I'm just going to plug is valid for the left into the is valid for the right. And I'm going to create a delay until next tick node and plug both of the not valid pins into that. And then I'm going to sweep that around and plug it back into the front. So basically, just on begin play, we're going to check every frame if the grasping hands have spawned in. If they've come in, and once they both have, that's when we'll go ahead and set our references. So the camera stays the same. You're just going to grab your VR replicated camera component. And then for the left and right motion controller references, you're going to want to get the skeletal mesh component of the grasping hand. And that's what we're going to use to set the location of our full body character's hand. So I'm just going to get skeletal mesh asset. We can do it that way. Just delete that. And I'm going to do that for the right hand as well. Get grasping hand right. And get that skeletal mesh asset. There was probably a better way to do that, but I couldn't see it. But then I'm just going to plug those into the appropriate references. And then we also need to make sure that we have a VR origin. So the VR origin is what's going to get scaled when we calibrate the player's height, or moved up and down if you're going to copy the code from like my seated play example. So the VR origin has to be the parent of your HMD and controllers so that it can scale that play space to the mesh. And you can see right here, the first parent is going to be that VR proxy component as well. And that's what's going to get scaled when we calibrate. So I'll plug that in as the VR origin. And I'll show you how to do calibration in a bit, but we will have to exclude this parent relative attachment when we calibrate, so that doesn't also scale the mesh, but we'll get around to that. And next thing we want to do is just copy these grasping hands, and we're going to set them to invisible after we set them as references, so that way we don't have two sets of hands. I believe that if we play now, it should work, but I'm going to go into our project settings, and I'm going to find the mappable input config for XR, and I'm going to clear that. I'm going to set it to none, because otherwise it will override the existing inputs that we're going to use for our hand animations. I think that if we start it right now, everything will work properly. No, it's not. Why is that? Oh, it's because it doesn't spawn the character blueprint normally. What you want to do is go to the included player controller, and we're going and spawn and possess VR pawn. This is where it's spawning our blueprint VR character. So we're going to change that to the child class that we've created. So now that should spawn instead of the regular default blueprint. And now you can see it seems to be working, but our hands are totally wrong. And don't fret, I've included rotations exactly for this. So if you go into the blueprints folder and go into our VR body component, and you go into the head and hand targets function, what you want to do is you just want to disconnect this location offset, and then come over here and plug in these rotations that say VR expansion template rotations instead of the ones that are in there right now, and just do it like that. And now when we press play, it's working just fine, except we're not calibrated. So I'm gonna just come over to the mirror to see that it's working okay. And yeah, so once we figure out how to calibrate, it'll be even better. So right now, that will replicate just fine. Let me showcase it for you really quick. number of players 2, and we're going to set them both as clients. So here we've got client 2. I'm going to put that on the right side here and set this as client 1. So if I come in here, it's not going to be a great example because they're both running on the same machine, but you can see from client 2 on the right side that client 1 that I'm controlling is having its body replicated just fine. So we know that that's working. I'm going to set that back just because we don't need to do it right now. And now we are going to implement the hand animations and the grasping hands. So by default in the VR expansion template, your hands don't do anything until you actually grab something. But my hand animations are driven by your controller, so even if you're not grabbing something, it'll animate your hand if you're like pointing or gripping or whatever. So I'm going to come into my VR body character. And I'm just going to copy over this hand animation table to the child actor that we created. And then I'm just going to create a variable for our animation blueprint. And I'm going to set that on begin play as well. So I'm going to do that by grabbing our mesh, get anim instance. I'm going to cast to our VR body animation blueprint. And I'm going to create a print string node so that if it fails, we know that the problem is that it couldn't find VR body anim blueprint. And if it succeeds, we are going to set this to our animation blueprint variable. And that is what this is going to use. That's what that's going to drive. And then one other thing, because this is already set up to use my inputs, I'm just also going to copy over the mapping context so that it'll be able to use those inputs as well. I'm just triggering all this on begin play before we go into that is valid loop. And then, so if I go in right now, our fingers should animate just fine. And we can see that they are. And you could leave it like this. Like this looks great just regularly when grabbing things. It's just how, a regular VR game is. But I'm going to also show you how to make it so that anytime you're actually grabbing something, it gets overridden by the grasping hands rotation from their like procedural gripping system. I've actually created, so this solution is from Dragon IK's template. They have a full body integration with this VR expansion template as well. And so please, I'll leave a link to their stuff in the description. It's from a free template. So I'm just gonna provide the blueprint UE, which is basically just like paste bin. All it's doing is copying the rotations from the grasping hand to our full body character. And so I'm going to go into our VR body animation blueprint. And we're here inside the anim graph. I'm going to go to the anim graph one. There's code that you need to paste into the animation graph and code that you need to paste into the event graph. And I'll provide links to both of these. This is the code for the animation graph. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. And then you can actually delete this use cached pose. I'm just going to plug our existing animations all the way into this. And then all the way at the end here, I'm going to come and plug this into our output pose. So we're just tagging that on at the end. And then you're going to want to create variables for all of these errors. So These are just array variables that hold the rotations for each bone of each finger. So I'm just promoting all of these to variables. It'll only take a second. I think there's like 12 of them. And now if we compile, I'm still getting an error. I forgot one. Or two, maybe. There we go. Now it should compile just fine. And now we're going to go into the event graph, and we're going to copy the code that I've included. It should be named in the description as the event graph code. So if I full screen that, and then I just copy all of this, come into our event graph inside the animation blueprint and paste it. Just leave this as do nothing for all of these. Confirm. And then I'm going to set this about right here. And so we're going to need a reference to our VR character blueprint. So I'm going to create that variable and trigger this on begin play. And then, let's see. We don't have any other variables we need to create, but these custom event triggers don't copy over correctly, so I'm just going to copy them because the custom events are here. It's just these triggers don't work right for some reason, so we're just going to copy it. Say set finger rotations first. Add rotation offset to left bones. Add rotation offset to right bones, and then object grabbing hand alpha setter. And that's just going to trigger all these different blueprints so that it's organized a little bit better. They're not all just connected in a line. But now, there's one other thing we need to do. For all of these rotator array variables, it won't work unless they already have empty values on them. So you need to create 3 array elements for each of these rotators. I'm just going to do it on one, copy it, and then go down the line and paste it to each finger rotator. Because if you don't do this, all the values will just default to 0. And you know, it doesn't work. It breaks it. So just going down the line for all 10 fingers. And there might be a better solution for this. This is just the free one that's provided by Dragon IK. You might be able to get away with using IK retargeter or something like that. I'm just not skilled in those, so I haven't made one. But this works just fine. And now when we head into VR, it's really stretched on your screen for some reason. But if we go up to a door and grab it, we can see it's fully using the finger grasping, the dynamic finger grasping from the VR expansion template. And it's also using my animations whenever we're not grasping something. So that works amazingly. So the only other important thing to show you is calibration. So I'm gonna just create like a keyboard value of 2. And I'm gonna get a reference to our VR body component and our calibration function. So whenever we press 2, just for example, it'll calibrate our height. But you can see that, you know, we set the VR proxy component as our VR origin, meaning that that's going to get scaled to match our player height to the mesh's height, our character mesh. but our mesh is also a child of that VR proxy component, and we don't want that to get scaled at all. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna collapse this to a function, and we're gonna call it custom calibration. And we're gonna save the scale of our parent relative attachment. That's what contains our character mesh. We're gonna get world scale, promote that to a local variable. We'll just name it saved scale for now. So we're gonna save that scale, calibrate our height, and then we're gonna set the world scale of the VR proxy, or of the parent relative attachment, back to our saved scale. So that way it's not scaling the things we don't want to change. So if you have like grabbed objects and things like that, you'll probably want to do this as well. But now when we play, I'm just gonna do standalone because I didn't replicate it. But now when we calibrate, it works. So if I like get really low and calibrate, it scales us up to the mesh. And I'm gonna go over to the mirror just to see how everything looks. And it seems to be working flawlessly. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you guys. Have a good one.